All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Seed to Harvest. I'm really excited to be joined by two of my favorite New York ladies, Heather Hartnett, the founding partner of Human Ventures, a startup studio and venture firm investing in wellness and digital health, and backed by renowned investors, including Ray Dalio of Bridgewater, David Solomon of Goldman Sachs, and James Murdoch. She's a founding member of Transact Global, which is how we met, which is the largest peer-led group of female fund managers with over $1 billion in assets under management represented there. A graduate of the Kauffman Fellowship Program, she's been listed as one of the 50 most influential women in America by Hearst Digital Media Publications, is a frequent speaker at TechCrunch Disrupt, and is a regular contributor to Forbes, where she covers a range of venture capital topics. She's also an investor in our fund behind Genius Ventures. And Siena Oberman, the founder of Artemis Pictures, a film production company focusing on stylistically bold, independent films and female-driven stories. She was named in Variety Top 10 Producers to Watch in 2021 and Diversity in Con Top 10 Female Filmmakers to Watch in 2019. She's had feature films in TIFF, Burlingame, Tribeca, Telluride, and Venice. Her films have been acquired by companies such as A24, IFC, Screen Media, Universal, Lionsgate, Hulu, and E1. Before Artemis, Siena was a development executive at Yale Productions. Prior to producing, Siena went to USC and studied business and cinema. So to kick us off, Siena, I would love to hear what your walkout song to that would be, because that is a long list of accomplishments.
I don't know, maybe Girls on Fire, just coming off the bio, but otherwise I'd probably like something more calm, like explosions in the sky, just typing on my computer day to day.
I love that. Heather, what about you?
Oh gosh. I don't know. That's just a hard one for me to say. I'm not as good as you, Sienna, on the spot. But I am really honored to be here with both of you two, being such rock stars in your fields.
Amazing. So Heather, you're a contributing editor for Forbes, and I absolutely adore your writing. I really appreciated a recent article that you wrote on starting a venture firm versus joining a venture fund. And it seems all three of us have chosen the independent path. And for me, it's been incredibly hard, but a great continuous learning journey and so rewarding. So I'm curious, why did both of you choose to go independent? And Heather, I'd love to start out with you, since this is a subject that we've discussed at length in your Forbes article.
Yeah. Excuse me. Yeah, I think that, I've always been really attracted to the founder mentality. So I came from a long line of entrepreneurs, and founding something or starting your own business was just kind of what we thought as Hartnetts were supposed to do. It wasn't what job can you get, it was what value can you create. And so the founding element has always been something that's interesting to me, not because I chose it, because it's much harder, I think, but mostly because I feel that whatever I'm interested in, or I feel that I have a unique insight in, I'm not always the commercial option to go and get a job in that, right? I had a very unique background, and people say they have a unique background to get into venture, but really I come from completely different roots. And so I think it's kind of born out of opportunity when you found something. And I was fortunate enough to meet my business partner, Joe Marchese, about 12 years ago, and we really hit it off in a lot of our concepts on how we're finding founders, what resonated with us, how to build a network, how to build value for your network. And so it was a no-brainer to start Human Ventures in 2015 in New York. And I didn't even set out to build a venture fund at that point in time. We were building companies, and then as the companies started to work and started to get some traction, we needed to have more financing. And it's constantly, I think, any founder or builder, you're not setting out to build something for the sake of building it. It kind of happens to you. And I think that's the difference between trying to get a job and starting something.
Absolutely. I love that perspective. Sienna, I would love to hear about your journey and why you chose to go independent as well.
Yeah, it's a crazy question, and I ask myself a lot of the time because it's an insane path, as I'm sure you guys both know, and it's so inspiring meeting people such as yourself who have done it, because I think when I was in college and looking into jobs, I wasn't even really considering starting a production company. And then just a few years afterwards, after having a job and working for different producers, I ended up doing it. But it was kind of a backwards journey where I had done, different gigs working for producers. And then I was just so passionate across different filmmakers and scripts that I had found that other producers weren't willing to make, that I believed in 100%. And I had said, let me go find all of the money and figure out the cast and find a way to make it happen. And they're like, no, it's not going to happen. And then within 9 months of leaving my last job, I had done 3 films with filmmakers that I really liked. And leaving the job, I was like, let me just give it a year of trying to go independent and see what happens. And I think because I was so driven and almost questioning if it was even possible, I worked crazy hard to get it done. And then I realized that doing projects you love with people you believe in, there's just like, so much more energy, at least for me personally, that comes with that. And that's what drives me. And so it wasn't really out of choice, it was more out of nature, and I think, like, the founder path is for certain people and not for certain people, so it's almost like when I was in film school, some people were like, "I wanna be Steven Spielberg," versus other people were like, "Oh, I really wanna tell these stories that haven't gotten made, and I have this idea and this idea," so I think it's more just, like, it's not about the title, it's about the action of do you want to see certain things happen, and unless someone else is gonna make it happen, then you have to make it happen, so
I love that. And I would love to hear about what the average day in the life looks like for both of you. I know no day is the same in the life of an entrepreneur, but I thought I'd share with our audience this quote I found from an earlier interview of Siena's. When I watched her in 2019 on the set of the fourth film, The Birthday Cake, an indie mob picture set in Brooklyn that was released this month, she was nimbly juggling a dozen tasks at once, including a bulky financier from South America, a set overcrowded with hangers-on, and Val Kilmer's personal documentary crew, an unexpected delay in Paul Sorviano's arrival, conked out Wi-Fi, and a crew member who wasn't up for the job. I asked her if this was a typical day on set. She said, there is no typical day. For me, the priority is what's the biggest emergency. So, Siena, does this still ring true now? And what are some of the day-to-day things that you do as a producer?
it does ring true. I mean, it's funny thinking of that day because, um the writer of that is Boris, who works with the LA Times, and he saw me in different phases. He saw me in development, he saw me in pre-production and production, and he comes from a non-film background, so he was just trying to understand what was going on, and that day was absolute insanity. I think pre-production and production are much more intense while we're actually shooting versus at home or in an office. Developing scripts and doing meetings is much calmer, but it's still applicable either way. So right now I'm in a development and post-production phase, so it's mostly reading scripts, meeting with writer directors, giving notes, doing general meetings, raising financing, which
Mhm.
you guys probably know a lot more about than me, but it's all pretty random and unpredictable. But I was pleasantly surprised to hear that it's the same for you guys. So it's all shared pain. What about you,
Yeah.
Heather?
I kind of subscribe to the feeling of monotony is a killer of creativity. So I really try to personally maintain some sort of routine, but in my work life, I love mixing things up. And, you know, I work with founders. I get to meet really incredible people who are investors. We get to go to conferences and do thought leadership events. We get to meet other, investors. And I mean, there's no other profession I think that allows you to be such a people person. And it's just my absolute favorite thing. So my day is really usually structured around the people that I'm meeting. And that is just my joy. Like that's where I get my energy is from other people. And so, or from, that energy in that environment, other people who are excited. So there is no typical day, but I love the fact that when you feel a little bit stuck or you have a blockage or you're not being creative, like my husband and I say, break the pattern. Like break the pattern if you're in, if you're taking too many one type of meetings and you have to do something else and you can't get there, then go to a coffee shop, go somewhere else, go, change your surroundings or your settings or something because mediocrity or monotony is really a killer of creativity.
I definitely subscribe to that belief, especially like in the period of fundraising. So, at the core, in both production and venture capital, you're connecting people, raising money, and deploying resources to worthwhile projects. So, both producers and venture capitalists play a role in connecting, nurturing, using both their right and left brains, and often come from very different backgrounds. And I'm a bit more familiar with the venture way of doing things. So, I'd love to hear from you, Siena, about what the process of fundraising for and selecting a project looks like. So, it sounds like for you, it's development, production, and post production. So which comes first? Are you doing them in tandem? Curious to hear more about the
Yeah,
order of operations.
it's a good question. So in general, I'm usually managing between 3 to 5 companies at a time that are all in different stages, and then projects, I would say 5 to 10 projects, and some of them, if they're further along in the development stage to where there's capital or talent attached to it, then it will be more of an LLC, which could be single ownership or partnership, or sometimes the financier owns the company, and then I'm just hired to service it. But in general, the financing for movies looks like putting a package together. So first selecting the script and filmmaker, which usually I work with writer directors. And then we have to go out and try and get talent attached. So it's probably similar in venture of building your team and building a pitch deck. And then once you have enough elements and a strong enough pitch and a team lined up, then you go out and start pitching people. And I don't know if there's projections in the same way, but we get sales estimates based on the package that we've built, which then can kind of give investors an idea of what the movie's likely to make from third-party experts. And, um, yeah, I think that's kind of the overview. I could go more into detail, but is it similar in venture where you get projections on a company and then you get either private equity or established financiers, or how does it work?
There's a lot of differences, but there's a lot of similarities too. I wanted to just ask first before we go on to venture, when an investor is investing in one of your companies, what is the expected return? Is it financial? Is it impact? Is it what are you selling in terms of the return on the investment?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So I think from a financial perspective, personally, I think you have to have a smart financial model to approach any investor. I think that's why I've been able to make films consistently is smart models. And the return on investment, the starting base is 120 to 130 if the film even reaches profits. And then after that, you go into a split net profit share. But I guess film can be fun for either high net worth individuals or really smart film companies that used to be film executives that have built funds because you can make crazy returns on investment. So one director I'm working with, he made a movie for 1 million, it made 102 million in the box office. But getting that hit, right, which has a much higher return on investment in a quicker period than maybe other industries, is very hard to do successfully. And then there's also like certain projects are more socially driven. Like we have one that's about child abuse prevention, one that's about suicide prevention, and then others are more just, hey, this is like a popcorn commercial movie. It's probably a safe thing to bet on.
Yeah, so there are a lot of parallels there too. So especially to early stage venture capital, right? So it's different from private equity. Early stage venture, you're really investing in a big idea, a big market where that market could be even more expanded, but most importantly, the team. So just what you were talking about, you're finding an incredible founder who is charismatic, who you think can lead a team, who can sell a vision, who can execute fast, and then you're investing into a market that you think has potential to expand, and you're investing ahead of the public markets, right? You're investing ahead of the paradigm shift or the zeitgeist. So you really have to kind of be a forward thinking investor to be able to grasp what the founder where the founder wants to go. Um, and then, so the two components to fundraising in venture. One is fundraising as a fund manager yourself. We don't have the money inherently. You typically will raise from what's called limited partners, and you raise from high net worth individuals or institutions, family offices, a lot of the same demographic. But I think across the board, fundraising for me boils down to one, conviction. You have to have conviction in what you're selling. It's a product that you're selling, right? When you're fundraising. So do you have that conviction? What got you there? So you're sharing all of the diligence and the memos and the research and the customer validation that got you to conviction. You're selling that, and that has to come through. And then your energy and enthusiasm and why your kind of station in the market has a unique insight or a unique view that other people don't have. So we're really selling that arbitrage opportunity that I see something that other people don't, and I also have access to other people something that other people don't. So you should bet on me to make you money. And it's absolutely a market, a returns driven market, and venture has traditionally been a way that you can, just like you said, you have to have to make a lot of investments to see those outliers, but the outliers do have the potential to be massive because venture capital is such a catalyst for growth, and technology has been such a catalyst for companies that could grow, that have high margin businesses, and it can really scale. And we're seeing that. And what I also love about the venture space is just it breeds, it attracts people who love innovation and who think really big.
Yeah, and speaking of fundraising, I'm curious as you progressed in your respective careers, how your fundraising strategies have shifted over time. So, Sienna, I would love for you to kick us off with maybe how your fundraising strategy has shifted.
Definitely. I think we learn from our mistakes, right? And I, I th- earlier on, I was fundraising smaller amounts of money at a time because the project's budgets were smaller, so anywhere from 50 to a couple 100,000. And then there's private individuals, which would be more likely to do that scenario, and then there's established film financiers that like to bet on things that are to succeed in the market, in which case you're getting one check from a company. So I shifted from doing, high net worth individuals to trying to just partner with a financier who then handles that, and they're
Yeah.
probably
Does that require
somewhat.
like a more established track record to be able and
Yes.
go out? Yeah. So it's
Yeah.
similar in venture where it's like you usually start raising from like high net worth individuals and then gravitate towards like more established financiers because you get a bit more concentration of working with folks, which can be helpful when you're making decisions quickly.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. But I think there's some projects that fit into the model that the more established film financiers would do. And then there's
Mhm.
other stuff that as a producer, you find it and love it and then have to kind of scrap it together from whatever investors you can get. So still
Yeah.
both. But
Yeah.
also
So
like paying more attention to market trends and sales and what's doing well than before. I feel like every year I learn more of what's going to sell well and not.
yeah. So how has that filter changed for you as you've been like fundraising?
I think, things that are cast driven and more in the genre space, which is thriller, action, horror, are much safer bets. So I would say
Mhm.
before I was doing maybe like 20% more character driven dramas and artistic pieces, and like, sorry, 80% of those, 20% of like the thriller, horror, action. And then now I've switched to do like 80% of things that I think will perform commercially well, but still have an artistic edge. And then 20% that are a little more risky.
Cool. Yeah, it's super interesting. It sounds similar to how we think about portfolio construction in venture with either like the riskier, wackier out there bets versus some of the consensus ones who are backed by like established venture firms. So, Heather, I would love to hear more about how your fundraising strategy has shifted over the different, both the venture studio, because I started as that, and then also as you look to, continue building human as a venture firm.
Yeah, I think it's important to understand who your buyer is. And, in the beginning, I just think there's more sources of capital now that are coming into to fund projects. I mean, it sounds like that's the case with you too, Sienna. It's just a more established market. People are now seeing that using that risk capital in the beginning to make those bets are paying off. And then in doing that, and unlocking more capital, you had more opportunity for innovation, and it kind of compounds on itself. And, several people have made their wealth through the venture and startup ecosystem or technology ecosystem. So something that's changed for us here in New York City are just more people who understand the mechanics of that. And it's not a traditional private equity investment or, what traditional finance would have, but there's more builders who have created that wealth and understand that putting money to work in the beginning, there's going to be a lot of losses. A lot of startups fail, but you're also investing in an ecosystem and you're building that flywheel effect. So that's really important. So from when we started until now, I think a big differentiation is just we have a brand in market, we have credibility, we have, our reputation. We have companies that we backed in the beginning that now have become what's called the unicorn status, over $1 billion in valuation. And so once you start to show people that what you said is going to come true, they don't have to take as big of a leap on you because you have to show that you can consistently perform that. That's when fundraising gets really fun because you just constantly have to be true to what you're saying and then deliver under promise and over deliver, and you build up that reputation. But I really do think it's time. And that's what a lot of people want to push. They're just like, it needs to happen now. And I think that credibility and experience comes over time. Um, so that it builds on itself. And, I think another thing that I learned is just when you're thinking about your buyer, where's their risk spectrum? Where's their risk tolerance? And, what are their incentives? And if you're an institutional LP why would you take a bet on somebody who's less established? Or if you're a family office, you are thinking about, you want to be more nimble and you want to have more access to those deals and you want to get into the new managers because you think that there's going to be more opportunity for return in those. So you're a little bit more scrappy. So you just have to know who your buyer is. And I think that took me a while to understand the ecosystem as well.
Hmm.
I
Yeah.
like a lot about what you said, under promise, over deliver, because I think this is a thing for producers as well, especially earlier on. And something that I've learned is like, you don't want to overpromise just to get money. It'd be way better, especially maintaining those relationships, um, and having to do meetings for years with them, to underpromise and overdeliver. So I think like I tend to be very like almost like downplayed and chill now when I'm raising money versus earlier on. I remember this other producer tried telling me that I wouldn't be able to raise money or produce unless I was like overselling something, and that just didn't feel authentic.
I think that's a really good point. It's
Yeah.
a good point. It's also the tactics that have traditionally worked for, men in these industries don't necessarily fit. You have to understand how you authentically sell as yourself because people understand if you're not true to who you are, it just shows so obviously. So I think that's a really great point, Sienna, and to really just understand, again, if you have conviction in what you're doing and you sell that and the reasons why, there's no hype, there's no, you know, faking it until you make it.
Yeah.
I love that, Heather. I feel like it's a lot about going on the fundraising journey. For me, was a journey of self-discovery. You take like 1,700 meetings and you're meeting with all these LPs and you're telling them about your big vision and your motivation, your compelling why. And it has to be very like on point to what you actually feel, or else it's going to be like a pretty it's just like not going to come across as authentic. And I feel like people have a much higher filter for authenticity than they used to.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, I was just looking at your tweet, I think earlier page
Oh
about
yeah.
the imposter syndrome and that gap. Or maybe you can say what you were talking about the
Yeah, sure.
experience.
Yeah, so I was talking about this with my coach because I was feeling like a bit of imposter syndrome. And then as I was having this conversation, it came up of like true confidence comes from experience. Like you were saying, it takes a long time for investments or movies like to become, to have that like feedback on your decision. And so it can feel a bit uncomfortable in the interim, but just like having the patience and not expecting to have a level of confidence that doesn't align with your level of experience has made the process seem much more exciting to me, and focusing on it's easier to like focus on the craft when you're not as like worried about the outcome of things. And I think hopefully it'll lead to a future.
The rub is for ambitious people, which I'm sure all three of us are. There's always a new normal. There's always a new mountain to climb. So you're always feeling that gap. But I always say that
Yeah,
imposter syndrome is, is actually it's a sign that you're
it's a
just
good thing.
you love growth.
Yeah, exactly. I was talking to someone and I was like, yeah, if you didn't feel that, like you'd be in the wrong room. And I was like, "Oh, yeah, that's a good point." Like, I kind of wanna always feel some element of that, so I know that there's room to grow.
Yeah. I
Um
like that a lot. I feel like it's super true to if you're taking an independent path as well, because you're
Mhm,
responsible for your own growth. And also, I don't
mhm,
know about venture, but for film, like it's like I'll get used to one budget level or one challenge of a project, and then if I'm continuing growing, it means I'm doing something I don't know or I haven't
mhm.
done before, and so it's just this constant like ebb and flow of discomfort and growth and excitement. But like what you're saying with imposter syndrome, it's you're like signed up to do something that you haven't done before. It's a little natural with it. But I really like your guys' positive spin on it, because I think that probably pushes a lot of people away from doing it, and it's self-doubt, but it's really just a part of the process.
Yeah. The patience piece has been a big part of my learning from this year. I'm like, "Alright, we got 10 years to see how this plays out." So, strap in for the ride. And on that, so Sienna, what's one thing you think that any aspiring filmmaker can do to set themselves up for career success, even if they're still in school or like on the younger side?
There's so many things. I think just like developing their knowledge the best that they can of film in general. So in school you have more time than when you're at a job or having a company. So watch as movies as you can from as many places to develop that knowledge because every industry has kind of like its own lingo and terminology that I feel like professionals have a higher level
Hmm.
of than students. But it also can come from just meeting with a bunch of different people that do different things in film, whether they're at a high level or a low level, and trying to understand what they do. Like, I remember when I was trying to figure out what job to go into, I just would go to festivals or networking events, and it'd be a very simple, like, "Nice to meet you. What do you do? Why do you love it?"
I love
And
that.
just like it was very genuine, and it turned out to be very effective networking because I think a lot of people don't know how to network at first. But for me, I was just curious and trying to learn, like, why do people do what they love or why don't they love it? And then, like, what excites me. So I think it's just about discovery in that phase.
I love that. Yeah. And Heather, what's one thing you think any aspiring venture capitalist can do to set themselves up for career success?
Well, gosh, I should flip that onto you, Paige, because your entry was, I mean, I loved it so much that I had to invest in you. I was like, where can, you know, yeah. So I'll let you answer it after me too. I like that what you said about curiosity and discovery. I think that's a big one. I really think you have to know where you're adding value. And so many people think, oh, I need to get this job, or I want this job, or I want something from somebody else, or I want to interview. And you're thinking about taking before you're thinking about giving. Why would that person take your meeting? Why are you going to make their life easier? What did you add to the ecosystem? Venture is one of those things where it's just, there's so much, there's so little structure. It's not like you have this like set bracket and career path, right? And so you really have to say, where is there a white space that I think I have a unique insight into? Why should you be in this field? Like it's not just something that is another job. It's something that you have to create for yourself because the whole thing is just a blank canvas. I mean, there
It's
are,
all made up.
yeah, I mean, there are a lot of ways in, but yeah, I don't even know. I didn't even try to get into venture per se, right? It was just, oh, I guess that I need to do this if I want to create this. Oh, I need this to create that if I want to do this. And so you just have to put the pieces together. But, it's a totally different world now. I think people in school are studying venture. That wasn't even a thing when I was in school. So yeah, I think, but the concept principles are the same. When you meet people, be curious, find out what they're doing, understand how they got there. What do you want to take from that? What do you want to leave from that? How do you want to do it differently? And then just valuable connections. So I think my way in was just trying to figure out what mapping the ecosystem and understanding, who I could create value for by either connecting them or helping them or, seeing what they needed.
Yeah, very similar thing breaking into film too. And like it's hard to bring value when you're just starting, but I think you're right about connecting people or everyone needs help with something. So
Yeah. And one thing, I didn't come from like a pedigreed institution or anything. So I just, like you said, I didn't care about title. Like that wasn't what was driving me at all. I didn't even know what the titles were. So I think the more you don't care about how you're sitting in the industry, or I need to set myself up for the job 10 jobs down. This is my third career. I think it's really important to just say, do you love what you're doing? Are you adding value? Do you love the people you're working with? Do you align with how they're doing business, et cetera?
Yeah. I think to piggyback off of what both of you are saying, one on like discovery, I was never the best student, but I was always really good friends with my teachers. So past high school and college, I think I took that same application of like using the human connection, like having empathy and curiosity, and applied it to whatever I was interested in at the time and kind of breaking down there was this implicit understanding of like hierarchy. And I was like, I'll just like be friends with those people, I don't care about the title. Like I'm just curious about what you do. And if you love to do it. And I think it's a big journey of self-discovery. If you go out and talk to 100 people, you're going to have to tell your story to 100 people, and you're going to pick up little Lego blocks from other people and your reflections on your conversations and refining that. personal narrative was a really important part for me because it's like learning anything. You need the vocabulary to explain what excites you so that you can find the people that are also as excited by it. And Sienna, to your point, there's a lot of jargon. So like if you don't know it, it's really hard to talk about it. And so that was really key for me. And I would love to talk about one of our other common threads, which is Forbes under 30. So Heather is a judge and Sienna and I were both honorees this year. So Heather, since we are relatively new to the community, I would love to hear more about why you decided to be a judge and then how to stand out in the field of applicants for any Forbes under 30 hopefuls that are listening.
I said yes to being a judge mostly because I think in order to find new types of fund managers and do what we just talked about, like have other people break into venture, you have to have other perspectives. So when I
Mhm.
was judging, I actually looked a lot at the distance traveled to get into the job that they were into. That was my
I love
lens
that.
that I came from first. And a lot of people might have sorted the spreadsheet by pedigree or years of ventures or what your deals were and all this sort of stuff. But for me, that journey is just so indicative of where you're going to go the next 10 years that's how you kind of pick those rising stars. And in venture and internally we call it build velocity. How fast is a founder building? Because it doesn't matter what they're building, the world's going to change 10 times over, the product's going to change 10 times over. But if you're applying that growth mindset that we just talked about to whatever you're doing, it'll be that in your life and you're naturally going to be somebody who's going to be a breakout star. So I just approached it the same way because I do think venture needs more people who are coming in who are not thinking about the spreadsheets and the making money and all this sort of stuff, but really more builders and people who are thinking about growing and stretching their mind and also having a lot of self-awareness of
Mhm.
the founders are the ones who are doing really hard work. You're not telling them if it's a good company or not just because you have the capital and the power structure seems that way. You have to really find the ones that align with that you're thinking about and be that one,
Mhm.
the partner and encourage them. So those are some of the things that I was looking at and I would continue to look at as I hire when as we build our fund franchise and as I partner with other VCs.
I love that. I love the idea of I was a calc tutor for a while in college, and I always one of my favorite subjects was vector math, and I think I apply that a lot to now that build velocity is like, okay, here's your starting point, here's your ending point, and like how far along that vector path are you, and like has your direction shifted, and how has that impacted like your velocity, which is super nerdy math stuff. But I do think about it a lot, so that's so funny. I never realized we had thought similarly about that specifically. Sienna, you and I met at a dinner at the 2021 Forbes Summit called Women in Wealth, which was definitely one of the highlights of the weekend for me. And one thing I didn't know about you earlier on was the backstory of your breakthrough story. So, in your senior year at USC, you had a pinched nerve, and in treating it, a doctor broke one of your vertebrae. So, you're unable to sit for 10 hours a day, and your plan to become a production assistant was derailed, but might have been the best thing that's happened to you so far. So, could you explain why?
Yeah. I mean, I had like worked so hard in college to have like the most competitive, I guess, assistant entry position possible. Maybe not the most, but at least I tried my best to have it
Hmm.
because it's so competitive to get a job entering the industry. And usually you start as an assistant and move up, whether that's for an agent or a producer. The way that you get there is by having certain internships. So I had interned at UTA, Paramount, Brad Pitt's company, etc. And then when my back was broken, I couldn't it just totally threw off the plans that I had had because they weren't physically possible. And it took me a few years to recover from it, but it wasn't even like 10 hours a day the first 2 years. It was like 10 to 15 minutes a day. Like I was trying to explain to my
Wow.
teacher that I couldn't be a normal student. And I was like, can I please do things online? They're like, well, you can stand in the back of the classroom. I'm like, how am I supposed to
Oh, no.
like, I was in business school, so I'm like, "How am I supposed to do, like, data analysis standing in the back of a classroom?" It's just not possible. And so then some of the directors that I had done shorts with, I had got into doing their ultra low budget features because I couldn't sit still even having, like, physical limitations in my time off from school. And producing's a lot of, like, calling, meeting with people, talking to people, pushing ideas forward, probably similar to venture. And so a lot of it I was actually able to do either like standing or in bed or taking like little sitting breaks in my apartment and just putting like projects together. And then like I had gone back to school on and off for a few years, and then I just ended up getting consistent jobs producing and enough things getting made. And keep in mind, this is in like the $200,000 to $500,000 range, which is like
Mhm.
tiny budget movies that no one will probably ever hear of. But it made me realize I could do something that I wouldn't think of doing. And a quote that came from it is like, life is what happens when you're busy making plans. And I think I would have been like way too afraid at the time. And not I think, I know I would have been way too afraid to be like, all right, I can go get like A and B list celebrities and millions of dollars attached to projects, never having done it at 21, 22, 23, 24. And so it just like limited my opportunities of what I could do for work. And because of that, I had to create an avenue. And then I'm like, oh, this is way more fun than being an assistant. And, I'll just continue struggling and building.
I love that. I think that constraints can breed a lot of creativity for me. I was like staying in San Diego. I was like, oh, well, I don't see a venture firm around that I want to work for long term. So I guess we have to make one. Yeah. And Heather, I would love to um, switch to another topic. So in a recent article, Heather, you mentioned early on at Human, you made our guide to being human that lists their values. And it's a group of 6 things that represent what you stand for. So being focused on growth, having guts, being resilient, open-minded, collaborative, and grateful.
This is such an astute question. I can't believe you dug in there and found all this stuff. But I mean, the common theme is like what makes us human? What makes us the people that we are? And I think people over-index on the things you read from a book and the tests that you take and all of the intellectual side of things. And don't get me wrong, being smart is really important, but there's different types of being smart. And so IQ in our industry is table stakes, but IQ and EQ is killer, right? And so how are you really thinking about the human side of things? And it might sound cliche because that's the name of my fund, but everything that I do really has a different spin of where is it coming from and where's that unique ability? I want to work with people. I want to give money to. I want people to make me money who I feel like have these qualities. And by the way, the world's changing rapidly. Like you can't be totally devoid of these human qualities and be a leader in this day and age. I think people figure you out.
I'm still working on all of those things now, but definitely agree
Yeah,
with them. And
same.
I think like, I don't know, I feel like there was a time not too long ago where the focus was just so much on IQ, and really what you're saying, EQ and IQ, with that combo and trying to develop both is like, it's really powerful now.
I mean, a link for us, Siena, is in the film world. I used to work with film director David Lynch. I ran his nonprofit organization here in New York. And, he's the consummate, like creative mind. And he used to say you have to go deep. You have to go deep for the big ideas. At a surface level is really always your mind can actually be a huge, inhibitor because you're not going really deep in understanding your intuition. And so much of what we do is intuition. People just don't give enough credit.
I love that.
So cool, Heather.
It's
Just
so cool.
fangirling over here.
I can't believe that's such a good question. I'm so happy that you asked it.
Thank you. I would say I've talked to you about this before, but I was like pretty deep in like spirituality and intuition. I think it's super important in like early stage venture and just like in general life to have a good sense of like what your gut or like intuition is telling me. I like this way of making decisions that I use sometimes is you flip a coin and you like name both sides of the coin, like one of the decisions, and you look at what it is and whatever your like gut is telling, whatever your gut reaction to it is at that point, that's kind of what your true answer is. So I always love that.
I can
But
imagine, Sienna, in your position too, like you're using your gut to know what's going to be commercial, what's going to go mainstream, what do you take a bigger bet on? How are you, that it's such a creative field with
It
execution
is.
involved too.
Yeah, I've learned to trust it more as time has gone on based on successfully following it and not successfully following it. And I think when I've followed it's worked out really well, even if it can't even be described in words. And so there's like this feeling I get after I read scripts sometimes, and maybe it happens like once a year or every other year, where I'm like, I know that this movie's gonna happen, like, let's go do it. And it's one of the best, like, intuitive feelings that logically I can make no sense of.
I
But
love
it
that.
helps. It's probably the same thing looking at companies for you, right? Or people or things to
Founders.
invest in.
Yeah, 100%. It's like, I call it table thumping enthusiasm, or you get off a call and you're like, yes, yes, this is it.
And then you thump your table.
Yeah, I'm like, so to
I
wrap
could talk
up,
to you guys forever.
I know,
love
this is
this.
so fun. Okay, cool. All right, well, with that, I'm going to wrap us
wait,
up for
and go to
today.
a comedy show page. You have to go to a comedy. Go to my
Okay.
Google. Go to a comedy show. Sometimes they're horrible. Sometimes they're fantastic. But I love that so much.
Okay, amazing.
Also jazz clubs. There's really cool jazz clubs.
All right. The good stuff's coming out just as I'm about to hit this top light. Thanks so much for tuning in today to Seed to Harvest. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe wherever your favorite podcast listening platform is. I'll be releasing new episodes weekly, and if you have any questions or comments, feel free to let me know on Twitter. That's Paige Finn, Paige and then Finn with 3 N's. Thanks, and see you again next week.